Thank you very much for joining us for AAPL's second town hall meeting. I just want to say a thank you from AAPL. We've been pretty active for the past couple of months. This is Kat Hungerford, by the way, AAPL's project development manager. We have been very active getting the GRC up and running for the past several months. That's our Government Relations Committee, and having a lot of activity both on the organization front and being active in some states that had some legislation that they were pushing forward that we didn't like. So we are really excited to be telling you what we have been working on, and then open up the floor to you all to participate and let us know what you think about what it is we've been doing, provide feedback, and anything else that you want to say to us. So this is our way to just talk to you and make sure that we're being transparent and keeping you all up to date. So Chris Ragland, our first chair of our Government Relations Committee, will be the one that leads this webinar today to give you all the updates. So Chris, I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Kat, and thank you everyone who took the time today to join us to hear what's going on. We do have a short presentation, wanted to familiarize you with what we are doing right now, what we hope to achieve in the future, and how you can participate as well. I do want to try and keep as much time as possible for the town hall portion where we can get some feedback from everyone. So without further ado, let's get started today. All right, so before we start, administrative kind of back office stuff. If you have a question, the best way to do it if you're participating on the webinar would be to just put it in the chat box. Send us a chat. The rest of the panelists and Kat will actually be reviewing your questions via the chat, and then we'll probably take those first. So if you want to make sure that we get to your question, please put it there. However, if you've dialed in on the phone and you want to ask your question verbally, that's fine too. Just use the little feature in the GoToMeeting where you essentially raise your hand. It's a little button that lets us know that you want to speak. So please do that. We'll take that note down and then make sure that we get to you if we have time available. So let's move on. What's the agenda today? I'm going to talk a little bit about the committee and how we are organized. Essentially the first committee that we formed, who's on that committee, what some of the roles and responsibilities are amongst those members. Then we're going to talk about, I think I've got somebody else on the panelist. If you could mute out, guys, that'd be great. There's a little bit of feedback there. We're going to talk about Florida for a couple of minutes. And Nima is actually, many of you know who Nima is. He's like he's a one-name person, mostly because I can't pronounce your last name, Nima, but Nima's going to give us a pretty extensive update on Florida. Let us know how many miles he was able to get by flying out there, not once, but twice. So that was pretty big deal for Nima and what he's been able to accomplish. Then we're going to talk about some regional watch zones that we've developed, how we've kind of broken up the U.S. Presently in terms of how we're watching what's going on in various legislatures around the country. Then we're going to talk a little bit about Real Estate Investment Association relationships, talk about how that can help us in terms of what we're doing, how that can be mission-oriented. I'm going to review something called Legiscan with you, and then we'll jump into the town hall. So that's the agenda today, and I'm trying to whiz through these things so that, again, we can protect as much time as possible for the town hall update. All right, so this is it. This is your first Government Relations Committee organization through the American Association of Private Lenders. So this is our first group here. Of course, I'm speaking as a member of AAPL, but we are supported by wonderful staff. You all got to hear Kat just a second ago, who works at AAPL. And then if you've been to any of the AAPL events, of course, it'd be difficult for you not to have met Linda. She's at all of those, usually representing them at the table. And then you've probably heard at one point or another, if you've worked in real estate, you've probably heard Eddie Wilson speak before. Eddie also has a deep understanding and relationship background when it comes to working with different government offices. So it's really, we're very fortunate to have him on our team essentially helping us push this through. The rest of the faces you see up there are essentially the rest of the team. So we've got three essentially kind of title holders, if you will. And by the way, we don't take ourselves that serious here. The reason we have titles more than anything, to be really honest and candid with you guys, is it helps our legislatures around the country just understand who we are and what it is that we're doing. So it means something to them, so there you go. So I got the first chair award here this time, which means I'm the designated speaker. for most of these events, which I'm happy to do and happy to support AAPL. Also got Matt and Melissa that also have specific titles. So both of those are attorneys. Matt also representing another private lender, RCN, who many people are familiar with, being a very large regional provider. And then, of course, Melissa with the Gerasi Law Firm, who's involved in their own events and has been a prolific leader in the space. So you've got us, and then we have the rest of the team below, and we've got some really heavy hitters here with some pretty nice backgrounds. So between all of us in this committee, we'll be rotating some responsibilities over the months and the year ahead, but that's the team you've got. And I think we've got a pretty good representation of private lenders and service providers, and then, of course, our support that we have from AAPL. So great team, in my opinion. Moving ahead, let's talk about Florida for a couple of seconds. I'm going to hand it over and let Nima take this slide. And Nima, please introduce yourself and give a fair representation. But I will say that Nima, he's a partner. He represents Gerasi Law Firm and does a lot of volunteer work for everybody here. And he's going to be able to give us some specifics. So Nima, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you give us the update on Florida.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate that, Chris. I just want to make sure everyone can hear me real fast here because I know I had technical issues earlier.
You're good to go, Nima. I can hear you loud and clear.
Excellent. Perfect. So, we've been out to Florida a few times to kind of give a quick summary. Florida had a standalone bill which would have required a license to make a business purpose loan secured by a 1 to 4 family property out in the state. That was SB 1632. That exact same language was placed in a completely unrelated bill, which is SB 1730. And that particular bill has been making its way through the Senate and has gotten kind of to the final steps here. This is the last week of the Florida legislative session. And so separately, the way it works in Florida is that every Senate bill will have a companion House bill that makes its way through the House so that they can kind of smooth out any voting issues such that when one bill passes one House, it moves to the other, and there's not this big kind of retrading occurring. So the companion bill here is House Bill 7103, and we've been monitoring both and really trying to advocate to both sides and both bill sponsors to try to explain why this language doesn't make sense. What is interesting here is House Bill 7103 does not have the mortgage licensing restriction language in it. Senate Bill 1730 does. At some point, these have to get reconciled, and there is a vote that's going to be occurring tomorrow in the Senate, at which time the Senate could either adopt and modify Senate Bill 1730. They could theoretically adopt the House bill in its current form, which was modified pretty extensively recently. So there's a lot of different ways this could turn out. But we're fairly optimistic that this language will not make it in. There's been numerous senators on record who have stated that they are opposed to keeping the mortgage licensing restriction language in this bill. And so we've seen a lot of effort there. Separately, and Chris alluded to earlier, which is it's not just AAPL and the FIDA loan anymore. Also, Florida Association of Mortgage Professionals has been jumping in, and they have a lobbyist there who's been very helpful. So we're seeing some support there, in addition to the Tallahassee Investors Network, which is a REIA over there, who has also been fighting pretty heavily. So we're starting to see a pretty big movement occurring over there in Florida. We'll know more tomorrow. There's still, pretty good possibility of moving targets here, as this has been a bill which has seen a lot of interesting movement. As recently as a couple weeks ago, we saw a Senator Stargill insert an amendment into SB 1730, which would have removed the mortgage licensing restriction. She withdrew it at the last minute. And so we sense that there's kind of last minute jockeying and positioning that we're seeing in the background. Like I said, we're optimistic about the results here, but at the same token, now more than any time, would be helpful to really kind of pick up the phones, in particular to talk to Senator Lee's office on the Senate side and Representative Fisher's office on the House side, since they are the bill sponsors. So as many voices as they hear that and understand that this is not an isolated or small battle, that there are a lot of interested parties in this, could and should still have a big impact here.
So Nima, this is Chris. Thank you for the update on that. I actually have a quick follow-up question for you that I think is relevant and a lot of people are asking me, when we talk about Florida specifically, and we see the emails, but can you help us understand why is it that as a national association that we're so interested in what's happening at Florida? I get that we represent the entire nation, and I get that we have private lenders all over the country, but it sounds like we're paying a lot of attention to Florida specifically. Why is that we're making a big deal about this and paying so much attention to it, other than just something that's happening in one of the 50 states? Can you give us some context there?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, Chris. So the big issue here is that, as people may or may not know, is that 40 of the 50 states in the country do not require a license to make a loan secured by a 1 to 4 family property. And even the ones that do tend to be mostly isolated. So for example, North Dakota, South Dakota, states that aren't particularly well trafficked. And so for a state to actually flip over and require licensing is fairly unusual. And in recent years, we've seen a lot more of this action. So, for example, Oregon, Utah are some of the more recent converts. And so our concern here is that Florida, which is a very populated state and a state that a lot of lenders do lend in all across the country. And so our concern is if Florida passes this, that it's just going to have a cascading effect throughout the country, and where most of the association members were able to lend freely, you're going to start seeing restrictions, and you can have states such as Texas and other states kind of start getting impacted. And from a political philosophical divide, to kind of give you a background, is this bill is sponsored by a Republican in Florida. So you could take a state, a red state such as Texas, and they could very much enact similar licensing statutes the next day. And so while it may not be in some members' backyards today, there's nothing from stopping that from happening tomorrow. And this is an area in which the association, it appears to have to be having some actual real significant impact. And so while this fight may be in Florida alone, at the end of the day, it looks like we may be getting results in Florida, and it provided a blueprint and pathway to really tackle this problem nationwide.
Awesome. Thanks for that follow-up, Nima. Really appreciate all the time and effort that you took to go down there, not once but twice. And I know you're coming from the West Coast, so that was a big commitment. So thank you again, Nima, for that. If you have questions specifically on the Florida issue, let's make sure that we get those in so that we can come back to it. I know that I've been talking about it in the context of, is this a bellwether for where things are going or what's to come, and what are we doing to shape it? Similar to what Nima just said. So again, if you have some questions or you have some follow-up that you want, let's save that for the end, the actual town hall portion of this. But again, thanks, Nima. So let's move to the next slide. Let's talk about what we've done with the committee and kind of dividing up responsibilities. So as the Government Relations Committee for AAPL, we really had to kind of tackle who was going to be responsible for, big ticket items or hot items that are coming down the pike. And so we did that, division of labor. So you see some of the faces circling around in some of the regions that we've got some coverage. This is basically who your go-to person is for your region. I think everybody's is essentially self-explanatory. Maybe mine not so much, which we kind of joked. Mine was Texas Plus, but so my region actually is Texas and Oklahoma, and I was making a joke, of course, a good Texas-Oklahoma rivalry joke by naming it Texas. But I also actually cover the region up here in the top left, Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana. But everybody else's, I think, is fairly self-explanatory. Hopefully we don't have any big Oklahoma fans on the call that are highly offended. But moving on, trying to have a little bit of fun there. Talk about the REIA relationships. I alluded to this. Nima kind of backed it up. Specifically in Florida, we had other people that came to fight with us, right? So when we're up in Tallahassee actually working on this, it wasn't just a national association because, we can be looked at as an outsider. And what's really important is creating these relationships at a local level. So at all things political, a lot of politics is local. So these are natural allies, these groups. We mentioned the, Tallahassee association, the mortgage association, these groups that we can align ourselves with. This is natural. They have many of the same interests that we have. And whenever you're looking at local constituents that may be harmed by these proposed laws or these bills moving into law, that's important. We really need the relatability factor. So the advantages are kind of obvious. In my opinion, these are local and natural allies. And what are the priorities here? So what we are doing at the AAPL and GRC level, so the Government Relations Committee, is we're essentially trying to identify those regions. So if you look on the previous slide that I have here, we're looking at places that are hot points. Right now, Florida is a big hot point for us, but there are other states that are also looking at specific things that may have a negative, potentially negative impact into our business, and we want to be aware of those. So we've got people that are responsible for them, but we're also looking for help in terms of identifying these hot button issues and specifically the states that are going on. And one of the ways that we're doing that is by just being connected to the local real estate investor organizations or association groups at that level. So we're doing that, but we wanted to bring this up, just to inform you that we're looking at making these relationships known, but also if you've got those relationships yourself, where you're thinking about how you can assist or ways that you can be an impact player, forming these types of relationships, I think that's a key component. Okay, so we've divided up the country. We're looking at specific hot button issues. What's next? Well, now we got to be able to monitor these types of issues, and nobody is going to go through every single proposed bill and read it and look for hot button issues, and then too often you find out about something after the bill has already been passed into law. So what are we doing? Well, we're actually looking, and this is already enacted, but we're working with software. So this is Legiscan. Some of you may be familiar with this. It's been around for a bit, actually. It's a software that's essentially like I kind of think of it as like a proactive Google Alerts. Its job is to scour through proposed bills in the various states and at the federal level and look for key terms, right? So you'll see a lot of times that lobbyists are using this or lawyers are using this, but so are people like us that are very interested in terms of what's going on. So this bill scraping service, Legiscan, does this for us. We decide what are the hot button issues, and then we have it go out there, and then it alerts us when there's a bill that's proposed that's using language that we told it to search for. So when right now, you can see we're looking at things like mortgage licensing statutes. That's the one that is kind of the obvious one. That's what we're talking about in Florida. We're looking at what are the next priorities. Now that we've kind of proofed the concept out and we've got it, we need to understand what are those next things. And I know I've had a number of talks with Kat and even Linda and about what is it that we should be watching for. And now we're talking to you about how you can develop those relationships with REIAs, and we're doing the same to decide what's important. Soft plug here, we're also going to be reaching out to you via survey methods in the future too, to try and gauge what levels of things that you find to be the most important for us to focus on. But back to Legiscan, kind of a neat thing, something I didn't know until we started prepping for this call. You can actually get a free account, and that free account will allow you to monitor what's going on in your state. Now, I think the free version only lets you search for like 2 or 3 different items at one point in time, so it's a little limited in function from the free account, but it's a really cool feature. If you're very interested in these types of topics, might be fun to go register an account and put something in there from a search term and see what you find. But it is what we're working with and what we are using in terms of being able to monitor what's going on in the entire nation. All right, that was a lot. I powered through that, tried to save as much time as possible for the town hall. We really want this to be a participatory event. So I'm going to get Kat back on the line here in a second and let us know how the chat questions have come along, or if we have anybody with raised hands. Kat, just an FYI, I'm not actually able to see those while I'm in presentation, so I'll pause it right now to see if I can look at those as well. But let's get started on some of the Q&As.
We don't have any questions waiting right at the moment, so we'll give people a little bit of time to think if they want to ask anything and then see what happens.
All right, that also works pretty well. Maybe if I know there's a couple of other of the committee members that are on the call right now. I'm looking at you, Matt. I'm looking at you, Melissa. Is there anything that you or either of you would like to add to what I just discussed to kind of expand upon that? And you don't have to, but I don't hear you if you're talking. All right, so we can come back to that. While we're eating up some time here and looking for some other questions, Nima, is there anything else that you'd like to add or kind of a follow-up right this minute in terms of your experience going out to Florida?
You know, the biggest aspect that I learned about this
as a definitely good learning experience. And one is that the legislative body isn't always necessarily interested in whether a piece of legislation is good or bad. They, to a great degree, especially at the state level, the politics really do matter. Florida is a good example of this. Is effectively there's really just almost one individual who is very well connected and has done a very, very good job of being well connected down in South Florida. Was really kind of the impetus behind this legislation, and in fact has been the one to really get this pushed through 3 years in a row. And so, it really was instrumental to have a lot of voices in the room, because had we been fighting this on our own volition, I really don't think that we would be getting any results. It was the fact that you had a lot of opposition coming out that really changed the paradigm here. And so this really was an interesting test case to see how quickly you could mobilize different organizations and have a singular message.
Yeah, I like that a lot, and I think that's good. I think that as we essentially get some repetitions and we start to do things like this, we're getting practice, and we're working on how we can have a better impact and faster. And hopefully we don't have to just put you, Nima, on a frequent flyer program and fly around everywhere. But the idea would be we get constituents in local areas that are able to represent at the same level that you are. That's a tall order to live up to, but I think what you did was really impressive. And I'm speaking from experience, having done a little work with you when we were in D.C. and we were essentially lobbying some of the staffers for the senators. I thought that was very impressive and really great. So I know you guys did a good job. I saw Melissa. She may have some feedback too. Melissa, are you with us? And do you have a couple of comments?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I certainly can. You're good to go. Please take it away.
Awesome. Perfect. So I just wanted to mention two things. One about the LegiScan, that's something that we're really helping out with AAPL and have our own scans that are happening in-house as well. So we're definitely on top of these things. It's how we found out about Florida. And we'll be definitely, making sure that the committee's involved as well as, the AAPL members to make sure that if there are any changes or updates that we need to know about, that you guys know and we can get involved ASAP. So just wanted to say, definitely helping out with that. Another just plug here, Nima and I are going to be doing a joint webinar in 2 weeks with AAPL, and it's going to be on consumer lending laws that apply to business purpose loans. So I think, it's kind of relevant to these as well, not necessarily government relations, but it might be interesting topics for people that might be interested, same kind of space. So I wanted to plug that.
Yeah, good plug for sure. I would say, having done a webinar just, I don't know, that was a week or two ago with Kat, we talked about kind of the other things outside of the legal concerns that happened in the foreclosure process. That was really well attended, had a lot of good questions at the end of the event. So, I know you guys will do great on that webinar. It sounds interesting, and I'll make sure that I'm on it as well. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say, Melissa.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
All right, so I'm going to going back to you, Kat. Do we have any other questions? And if not, then we'll call it a success and very informative. But do we have any other questions, Kat?
We do not at this time, so I think that means that you've done an excellent job explaining everything. Anybody who has questions after the webinar, you can go ahead and email them to us at contact@aaplonline.com, and we will be sure to get back to you as soon as possible. So your feedback on this kind of initiative and legislative initiatives does not have to end with the town hall. This is just where we wanted to create an open forum for live conversation. So whatever you have to send us, we are more than happy. Oh, somebody has a question. Okay, Edwin, do you want me to, I'm going to unmute you right quick so you can ask it. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
We can.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you guys for putting this on. I have a question as far as the frequency of the town halls. Are the town halls going to become a regular occurrence? Is this something we can set our calendar to, or is this only going to be whenever the AAPL feels that there's information to be pushed out?
We do have town hall scheduled. I'm getting some feedback here, sorry. Let me mute you right quick. Okay, so we do have town halls scheduled on a quarterly basis. So if we have things to say in the meantime, generally we'll send those out by email, but the town hall is a regularly scheduled thing. Our next one, let me think, you're really stressing my memory here, trying to remember when. We do have one more scheduled as a webinar that will be August 7th at 1:30 p.m., also Wednesday. So we'll be sending out reminders for that. If you registered for today's, you'll also get reminders for the next one too. And then from there, we will have our annual in-person town hall meeting at the upcoming AAPL conference in Las Vegas. So we will be gathering everybody in a room to kind of give these kind of updates in person too. With, as they are on the call today, they'll be sitting, our GRC will actually be sitting in a panel to answer questions there. So we get both the webinar opportunity, the online opportunity, and then the in-person one at the conference itself. So after August 7th, then the next one will be, I think it's November 7th or 8th. The 8th, thanks Linda, in Las Vegas. And then next year, of course, we'll send out those notifications as they come up too. And I do see questions from a couple other questions out here. How does someone get more involved if they choose to do so? Should we reach out to our regional facilitator? That was also from Edwin. The answer to that question is yes. So the regional chair, so to speak, for your GRC, they will be your main point of contact as far as managing things that are happening in the region. So do reach out to those people, form that kind of relationship. We will also have active emails coming from AAPL. You've probably seen a lot of our legislative blasts on Florida to get people involved. But the main point of contact to avoid overloading our small AAPL staff will be to go to your regional person and stay in touch with them. So I think that's it for questions. We'll wait just one quick more moment to see if anything else comes in. And other than that, I think that's it for our town hall today.
Hey, Kat, real quick before we call it and sign off, can we plug one more time? Melissa did, but when's the next webinar that we have coming up? Can you give that date and that time again, just so that we have that?
Oh, for our town hall is May 14th. Oh, May 14th at 1 p.m. I believe. Yes, and registration for that is online now. We'll also send out reminder emails. So if you are not currently registered with us as a friend of AAPL, that's access to all of our updates. Go ahead and hop online to our website. You'll see buttons all over the place that advertise becoming a friend of AAPL. That's where you learn about webinars we have coming up, whether they're through the GRC, through the Education Committee, or otherwise, and also about all the fun events that we have going on to keep everybody kind of in the loop on what's happening in the private lender world.
That's awesome. Looking forward to it. Thanks, Kat.
Absolutely. All right, and I am not seeing anything else, so thank you everybody who attended the call today, especially a big hand to Chris for leading our presentation and the town hall and showing us through what all the GRC has been up to. We really appreciate having the GRC from AAPL side, and we are really excited to see what changes we can affect next. So thank you all for attending today, and until next time, talk to you later. Bye.